Welcome to the next installment of LIA100. My guest today is Pat Reed, who is an extraordinary business agility change leader and transformation expert coming to us from Australia. Welcome, Pat.
Thank you.
So I wanted to make sure that I know the first time I met you, you were speaking at the Business Agility Conference, the inaugural one in New York City. And as soon as you started speaking, all of us had our phones out texting, oh my God, who is this person? This is amazing. So I want to hear about your journey, how you became the business agility expert that I first heard of 2-3 years ago.
Thank you very much for that. My journey really has been quite organic, quite natural, to the extent I started out as a psychologist in community mental health and moved into, so I practiced in community mental health center for 6 years and then moved into criminal justice as a series of sort of serendipitous events. Spent a couple years doing some amazing work in criminal justice, and when I was doing some deep research on that work, I was recruited to move into criminal intelligence to work at the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, kind of state branch of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and love that work. You can tell a pattern from my experience is very much about people and the complexities of human behavior and the complexities of systems interacting with human behavior and what happens when those systems start to fail. So that's been a pattern that sort of led my journey. I responding to the challenges and the needs of that pattern. So I worked in criminal intelligence for 6 years as well. And then the story gets kind of interesting. I was very happy in each one of those roles. But as it turns out, when Walt Disney was trying to decide what tech stack to apply in California, and they needed to start to apply some technology to their back-end solutions, they decided to use whatever was being used by the FBI or the government agencies. And that happened to be quite a complex proprietary tech stack. And the Disney company was recruiting for people with that tech stack background. So my husband and I were both recruited from the CBI to move to California and work in entertainment, which is polar opposite when you really think about it. But it was quite serendipitous. We'd never planned it. We just responded. Again, adaptive response. So spent the next 15 years, almost 16 at Disney, leading the technology application of business technology to making of major motion pictures, and particularly feature animation. They were some of my favorite internal clients. And then retired from the Walt Disney Company as I was being recruited to Universal Studios to solve some impossibly complex technology challenges. Spent 6 years there, then was recruited by one of the presidents from Disney, moved up to Northern California, San Francisco, and became the president of the Gap and needed someone to lead the agile transformation at the Gap and also to lead agilizing the PMO, global PMO, the portfolio management process, and finance, IT finance. So I kind of jumped at the chance to break into e-commerce and retail and moved to Northern California, and then retired from the Gap about 8 years ago to form my own company. So that's my journey in a nutshell.
Okay, and I have a million questions about this, but I guess mostly for our audience, at what point did your journey into people, systems, and patterns intersect what became known as Agile? Was there a point when you said, okay, I'm now doing Agile, or was Agile just kind of seamless integration with what you were already doing?
The second, Agile was really the natural way of working for me, the natural way of being, most importantly. But I was recruited when I first started working at the Gap. I was recruited to become a member of the Agile Alliance board. And that, I think, was sort of a milestone or a key point where it became more of a focus for me. Before that, it was just the natural way of working. As you'll see that there's a pattern in all of those industries. It's absolutely vital that we practiced agility, just didn't have a name for it. And it was long before, I was practicing agility long before it became the Agile Manifesto or it became a thing. It was just the natural way of doing business. And quite interestingly, a lot of the practices that Agilists practice, like daily stand-ups, storyboards, came out of Disney. In fact, the making of a major motion picture requires extreme agility in terms of daily reviews, not only of the impact of the product on the customers, but also the cost and the value ratio. So in entertainment, they do way beyond just daily stand-ups. They do daily finance reviews and adapt the photo shoots for the next week quite using a lot of agile practices.
Wow, I had no idea, but hearing you explain the journey really answered the question for me, because when I first heard of business agility, everybody else was talking about scaling agile, about agile plus, and you came out of the blue, and it felt that way to me, talking about people and patterns and sensing. So now that totally makes sense to me. So when you first came into agile, was it a sense that, okay, hey, I know this, I use this, it's just a new label, or did you have to have any kind of conversation with yourself on how to fit agile into who you already were?
No, it was totally organic. It's part of my DNA. There was absolutely nothing that was different than just my perception of this is the natural way of doing business. Always focused on the customer, always focused on creating an environment and an ecosystem where every one of your people can reach their full potential and really step into, you know, a continuous change, continuous learning, and continuous innovation. So it was just very natural for me, very organic.
Wow, can we adopt that as the definition of business agility, where we create an environment, an ecosystem, but all of our people can be at their best?
I think that is, by default it is. If we haven't adopted it yet, we just haven't been paying close enough attention. Essentially, that is what agility is.
It is. I've never heard it expressed in quite that way. So yes, I would nominate, let's make that official and let's work towards that.
Indeed. Lovely.
Absolutely. So I'm going to go be a little geeky for a second, but can you talk about, I know you don't really do titles and that kind of thing, but did you have a career in mind when you started this? Like you define yourself as a developer or a BA, or is it just like, whatever the problem is, I can apply the same skill set to helping this context?
Interestingly enough, I never really had a career plan, you know, in terms of by this date, I want to have climbed the career ladder, if you will. In fact, I've written an article for InfoQ on the adaptive or agile career path that I followed, which is really more following your passion, if you will, in terms of where you're called or your calling, in terms of what is the challenge that presents itself that calls for you to come and solve. So titles have never meant very much to me. Spheres of influence were more important in terms of a difference I could make, but I didn't have a career path with set targets and plans to be at this level at this time. I was more drawn to challenges that needed to be addressed, that called to my attention to go solve. For example, I loved my job in community mental health and probably would have stayed in that field as a clinical and behavioral psychologist forever. But at the time, there were a series of, this was in Colorado, and there was a series of murders that just absolutely rocked the community, because at that time Colorado was a very safe, very safe community. So there was a need for someone to step into a role to lead some investigative research and discover what was the breakdown in the system. And I was recruited by the governor of the state, by the Criminal Justice Division, to lead that research effort. And so I left the comfort, if you will, of my community mental health background, which was in line with my academic training, to take on a fairly interesting challenge to try to understand what was going on with the community and how might I be able to discover not only those patterns, but actually use that information and that intelligence, if you will, to make a difference. And then when I was doing the detailed research analysis on that fieldwork at the Administration of Justice Computer Center, which was housed in the same very secured facility as the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, I just serendipitously ran into members of the CBI who recruited me to move into forensics and intelligence. So it was just a natural progression with no real interest of following a career path. There's patterns about people, but nothing that was preset for me. I was actually applying agility in my career progression.
This is an extraordinary journey, Pat. I'm going to ask a little bit about this sense. It sounds like it's innate ability to step over into a challenge, to think in terms of systems. Was that innate for you? Was that based on learning or family, or just feel right? You can see the patterns and systems.
It was innate. Long before Carol Dweck did her groundbreaking work on the agile or growth mindset, I was intuitively practicing that. And you'll recall from looking at, as we know now, in our practices of agile, that it starts with being agile and thinking in an agile way with an agile mindset. And you'll notice the pattern is when we are practicing in our full agility, we're drawn to challenges. Challenges actually energize us. The bigger the challenge, the more we're stepping into that challenge. We don't hold back out of fear of looking silly or not knowing how to do it. When I took on the challenge of doing that investigative research, I had no idea how to do it or what I was getting into. I just knew that I would learn along the way and focus on what the outcome was in terms of creating a community awareness of creating a safer environment for everyone to thrive.
Okay, this is beyond inspiring. And I really wish we could share this with everyone, because so many of the things that you're talking about are issues that so many women face. Like, how do I don't know what I'm doing. I don't have enough expertise. I don't have the 25 years of supposed experience before pursuing this. And you're saying being agile just means recognizing the challenge in front of you and stepping into it, knowing that growth mindset will help you navigate a path through that challenge.
Yes, indeed. And when you look really at the heart of what is a growth mindset, what does it mean to be agile? What it means is that we're not fearful of not knowing how to do something, but instead we know that by stepping into the challenge, we're going to learn more, even if we stub our toe a bit or run into areas where we need to learn. When you think about it, it's all about learning, and agility at the heart of being agile is learning. And one part of my journey that I haven't actually mentioned, and it was only your question that sort of prompted it, for the last 44 years, I've been, in addition to those careers that I described, I've been an adjunct professor at different universities, starting out 44 years ago at the University of Denver in Colorado, when I was at the criminal justice and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. And then when I was recruited to come to work at Disney in California, I started teaching at Woodbury University for 22 years before I moved up to San Francisco, teaching all things agility even before Agile had a name. Systems analysis and design, business analysis, managing complex systems were the types of courses that I would teach for adult learners. So now I've developed, about 10 years ago, developed a program for UC Berkeley Extension, which I teach at on the weekends on Agile principles and practices, Agile management mastery, innovation, and just finished a program that was life-changing in collaboration with the university in Barcelona and Madrid, EAE, in enabling young executive MBA candidates to reinvent their businesses and create a new business model and pitch it to some angel investors and venture capitalists. And the 2-week experience was just mind-blowing for them and for me as well. So it's just all been quite organic.
I'm sure organic, but also how in the world do you do all this, Pat? How do you make time or find time?
It just it's a matter of focusing on value and looking at the cost of value and looking at what not to do. I often speak at conferences helping individuals understand that we own our own time, and if we're not really aggressively managing how we invest in our time by creating our own value proposition and our own cost of value indicators, and by increasing the amount of work we don't do, as is one of the principles in the Agile Manifesto and in Lean as well, we can really shift our priorities to create the highest value at the lowest cost for the greater good. So it's an invitation that the more you take on, the better you get at it, quite honestly.
Okay, I think I wish we had 10 hours to really deconstruct your process, because I want to learn from this, but I also want to talk about your community engagement, because you are very active in the community. You speak at conferences. As I mentioned, when I met you 2 years ago, husband and I still refer to our conversation with you. Did you remember what Pat said? So you're inspiring a number of people and you're mentoring. How did all this come about? How do you include all of that work into your life?
I prioritize mentoring and I prioritize community awareness, and that's actually part of my teaching. When I teach, the investment there is for expanding the community and really serving a larger community. So I make it a priority. I do teach most courses on the weekends, and I do most transformation work during the week. And I do take a responsibility to really develop the next generation of leaders and do quite a bit of mentoring in the off hours, evenings or mornings. Just kind of trying to, you just prioritize, right? You set your targets, you focus your time, and it's simply, again, very organic, very natural.
You make it sound very straightforward, which I think it is for you. But I think
Yes.
for the rest of it, it's probably going to be a bit more challenging to emulate your example.
Well, I think everyone follows their own path.
True. I think, one of the reasons we do this LIA100 interviews is so that as we're shaping our own path, we can look at what women like you have done and take inspiration and learn from your journey and apply that to our own journeys, hopefully.
Indeed, and that's the entire spirit, right?
Can we talk a bit more about the differences that you've seen in people or in organizations over the last 50 years that you've been doing this very interesting work?
Yeah, there's a pattern that I still see, and it still surprises me, even though the awareness is there now and Agile has a name. Agile, there are traps that individuals fall into, and there are traps that Agilists fall into. And I'll label those primarily process traps or historical traps, past. Kind of the pull of the past is so strong that I have seen teams in some of the transformations I work on over-engineering their Agile adoption, over-engineering their practice adoption, and their process adoption at the expense of this continuous organic learning and kind of culling the waste out of the system, but instead kind of falling into the trap. A lot of us, when we're faced with extreme complexity, we gravitate towards complex process and controls to actually offset the complexity of change. And that's actually the worst thing we can do. So I've seen that. I've been in my career path is quite mature, let's say. So I've seen the startup of Agile, the startup of XP and software engineering, and how bold and brilliant that was. But I've also seen it fall into over-engineered traps of actually replicating the very thing that we're trying to eliminate: the excess waste, the excess process, the excess controls at the expense of value. So what I do is try and cut right to the heart of agility is about learning and adapting and continuing to let go solutions that we might have needed to use as training wheels to adopt our agility. We need to let those go and shed those as soon as we don't need them any longer, so that we can take our agility to the next level, especially if we're looking at the enterprise and truly enabling the entire enterprise to learn continuously and be adaptive. I've mentioned this once before. Agility really is about learning continuously and not kind of building that comfortable cocoon with excess process.
It reminds me of something you said in a talk once. Sometimes you have to believe before you can see.
Yes, you always have to believe before you can see. You're blinded by your beliefs. Our cognitive biases are stunning. In fact, I have a client in Australia who is anxious for me to do some development with their individual leaders on cognitive bias. We are so blinded by our old beliefs that we actually have to take that leap and stretch out of that to see new ways of thinking and new ways of working, and shed those old cognitive biases that will inevitably cloud our ability to radically change and grow continuously.
And I think that's a pretty awesome note to end this LIA100 interview because of time constraints. Pat, absolutely brilliant and inspiring as always. Thank you.
Thank you.